U.S. President Joe Biden and his predecessors, Democrat Barack Obama and Republican Donald Trump, are sounding the alarm over threats to American democracy as the countdown starts to the congressional midterm elections. Three men converged on Pennsylvania Saturday to push their parties to the finishing line. Biden said the race marks a defining moment for U.S. democracy. Obama echoed Biden's warning, saying the stakes are high as democracy is on the ballot. At the same time, Obama attacked Republicans for becoming increasingly averse to everything from science to respect for rules. And Trump blamed Biden for turning the country into a police state. Americans will be going to the polls on Tuesday to decide who will control Congress during the final 2 years of Biden's first term. This, as a vast majority of the American people fear that the country will go through a period of political violence. Ramin Mazaheri joins us from Chicago to tell us the latest on this, and Don DeBar is an activist and commentator joining us to break this down for us. Ramin Mazaheri, it's good to talk to you finally on this topic because really curious as to what's going on there in the States. What can you tell us?
Good to talk to you, Kaveh. Much appreciated. It's certainly something that has been dominating the headlines here in the past week due to the attack on the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. But before we get to that, I'd like to just bring up a few statistics and points that kind of show how deep the fear is here of election-related violence. There is a new poll that seemingly all the news media are talking about. 9 out of 10 Americans are afraid of politically motivated violence. That's really a stunning amount. You're talking about almost everybody, 9 out of 10 people. And I could say that, just from my experience, I'm here in Chicago, the third largest city, and I have been downtown, right downtown on what they call the Magnificent Mile, and trying to get the, man on the street interviews. And it's very difficult. People just don't even want to talk about the election because it's just so divisive and there's just so much fear about it. Going back to that poll, the blame is basically totally equal. Republicans blame Democrats for stoking the violence, Democrats blame Republicans, and then another third blame both parties equally. So I think it's really sort of clear to everyone that both parties are to blame, that neither party has put together any sort of platform based around unity, based around genuine patriotism. And so this is just sort of very reflective of where the United States is at in this moment. And it's a moment that goes back really 6 years. There's another interesting statistic. There have been 10 times the number of threats against members of Congress than there were just 5 years ago. And that's when you really have to go back to see when this sort of, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but somehow, sort of a pre-Civil War kind of a state has existed. You have to go back to 2016. The arrival of the corrosive Donald Trump, but then the simultaneous arrival of the equally corrosive repression of his supporters has really shown the United States to have a political culture that is plagued by, perhaps above all, self-righteousness, but also anger and violence. And it's really only gotten worse. A recent extensive survey showed that a third of Americans believe that political violence is usually or always justified. Now, America is about the least likely country to have a socialist socialist-inspired revolution that's going to put the 99%, the working poor class on top. So what they're talking about really here with this 1/3 of political violence is basically just to run over the other guy, run over the opposite team. So it's really indicative of where this country is at.
Uh-huh.
And I think we have to talk about just a bit about the in-home attack on the husband of the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi is the most unpopular leader of Congress, and that is really saying something. She has been dogged by accusations of insider trading. She is always criticized for flaunting her enormous wealth. So it's really not too surprising that she was picked out. But it is, what's exacerbating the situation is that there are these accusations that there is a cover-up of what really happened. They refuse to release the security footage. The cops refused to release their body cam footage. So this is really sort of the October surprise. And it's very unfortunate that her husband is was hit on the head by a hammer. But this is what people are talking about. I have to report that. One side says it's misinformation that there's a cover up. The other one says this is yet another elite cover up, similar to 2020 with the Hunter Biden laptop. And it's about political violence. Now, what's going to happen? Let me just conclude here with saying I was here back in 2020, and I was on that magnificent mile right downtown Chicago on Election Day. And we were thinking that there's going to be pickup trucks full of people in bats, and anti-Trumpers are going to fight pro-Trumpers, and they're going to really go head-to-head. It was a ghost town. It was an absolute ghost town. It was just us and a bunch of cops. So I bring that up to say that it's very possible that a lot of these fears are really unfounded and overblown. And we'll just have to wait and see what happens. Last thing I'll say, keep in mind that there might be Senate runoffs that are required. So we might not know the actual outcome for 2 to 3 to 4 weeks after Tuesday, and that's just going to increase the tension here.
That's going to add definitely to the tensions. Don DeBar, I saw you shaking your head a lot when our correspondent was talking there. What's on your mind?
I'd like to respond to all of it. Is there time?
Say it again?
Let's start with the poll.
Sure.
I assume that what we're talking about is the Washington Post ABC poll that came out a few days ago. It's a sample of 700 and some odd people. The Washington Post is owned by Jeffrey Bezos, who has a $700+ million contract with the CIA. The idea of political violence paralyzing the political system here, and that the Republicans and/or Trump and/or supporters constitute some kind of existential threat to an American democracy that, in my 68 years living here, I've yet to witness, is right off the CIA's page. So, there's a margin of error plus or minus 4.5% in that particular poll, if that's what we're talking about. It shows, by the way, that there's a slight majority of people who want to see the Republicans take both houses. And there's the deepest divisions are over issues like abortion, climate change, and violence in the cities, quote unquote, the crime. This is in the face of, right now we're looking down the barrel of World War III. The U.S. government and Zelensky in Ukraine are back and forth about whether or not the U.S. should take a military action against Iran. We're finding out that the U.S. has boots on the ground in Ukraine. They can't use the word advisors because they'd get laughed off the pages of Vietnam's history book. But they're saying that they're there to count weapons out of one side of their mouth, and on the other side saying there's been no diversion of the $50+ billion worth of weapons that we put there. I've been talking to people in the United States about politics since I graduated high school, certainly in 1972. I live in metropolitan New York, which is the largest city in the United States. I don't see anyone that I speak with, and I've run for office a dozen times myself. I know people in politics all up and down Westchester County, New York City, Long Island, Rockland County, etc. No one's afraid of political violence here. This is a media hype. And the media that we're talking about is the same media that paints Iran as the great Satan, Russia as the biggest danger in the universe, China as evil, thieving, inscrutable business people, and a whole lot of other caricatures of other people around the world that really are meant to serve a few greedy people who have control of the political and military and security apparatus in the United States and Western Europe. So I don't buy any of this, and I have some considerable experience in it myself.
Ramin Mazaheri, you have somewhat of a different version there. How do you see what Don DeBar's statements there in your view? And quickly, we're running out of time here.
Well, I think when he's criticizing a poll that shows 88% of Americans are worried, when he's criticizing there's a margin of error of 4%, I don't think that's really much. The other poll that I referenced about 1/3 being open to political violence, that poll was of either 3,000 or 8,000 people, so that was a very extensive poll. The fact that I mentioned about 10 times the threats to Congresspeople than just 6 years ago, that's a very real thing. The one thing that I will agree with him is that it's not just the violence by the pro-Trumpers. People are worried about the anti-Trumpers as well. And since 2016, there has been this sort of Red Scare sort of a witch hunt against pro-Trumpers. Last thing I'll say is that this gentleman, he's only referencing the Northeast coast, what he's talking about. There's a whole other part of the country, not the Yankee part of America, that is genuinely worried about political violence. And as I said, some of it, we were all worried about it in 2020. It didn't really happen until January 6th. But to dismiss this when it's 88%, to say that this is all just sort of nonsense, I just don't think that, I don't think he has many people who will agree with him on that.
All right, unfortunately, Don DeBar, just a minute. Again, we have Ramin Mazaheri in the form of a correspondent here, so we're looking at that vantage point in terms of how you're addressing things. Go ahead, Don DeBar. Just 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Very quick. 88% of 735, or I don't know what other poll you're looking at. The one that was cited in the news article is the one that I referenced, the Washington Post ABC poll. These are insignificant numbers, and the reason I referenced the margin of error wasn't on that question. This poll really was about, in some places, in most places, about some of the issues that people are talking about and/or their electoral preferences. I am saying, from speaking with people in politics across the board, from Los Angeles to Bangor, Maine, on a daily basis, no one I know across the board, rich, poor, black, white, etc., is worried about political violence. Only people that are drawing their information from the news media here are, and that's where it's being stoked. And finally, my point being that this poll conducted by the Washington Post is conducted by a firm owned by a guy who has a $600+ million contract with the CIA. And the CIA wants us to believe that there's political violence coming so that there can be more steps taken to take away what few liberties we still have.
Okay,
I don't like the poll because it serves that.
We're going to have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we're just out of time. But thank you. This was enlightening. I didn't anticipate this. However, Ramin, thank you for the update on that, and thank you for the breakdown there, Don DeBar. We appreciate it. And with that, we come to an end for this edition of the News Review. Thanks for tuning in.